So you have said publicly you have the votes you believe to get a vote perhaps as early as Thursday of this week for the full House to approve your bill. But that's not the only vote you're going to have to take, because after this goes over to the Senate, if they come up with a version, has to go to conference, has to come back to the House again. Let's talk about this, the state and local tax deduction specifically. If it comes back the way the Senate has it right now, that's to say no state and local tax deduction, can you get the votes in the House again?
Well, it won't come back that way. I've made the commitment to our members in the House that we will restore the state and local property tax deduction up to $10,000. That's twice the national average. Really important, I think, to families all across the country, especially important to these high tax states. So I've made that commitment that that final vote on the final bill coming back to the House will include the state and local property tax deduction.
So fair enough, Mr. Chairman, but as you know so well, the Senate has certain rules they have to comply with. And one of the ways they're trying to come within the rules in terms of how big a deficit they have for how long is to totally eliminate that so-called SALT deduction. So will you, under any circumstances, go along? What if you don't get tax reform at all if you don't accept it?
Well, look, I'm confident the Senate knows exactly the priorities of the House. I certainly do. And so that commitment to keep that state and local property tax deduction is in concrete. And I fully expect that to be the case.
So just to drive it home, that is a red line over which you will not cross.
It is.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's talk about other things you might do to help the Senate a little bit. What other things might you consider in order for them to come within their rules? For example, would you consider something slightly above a 20% corporate tax rate?
So look, right now, we're going to let the process go forward. And I really appreciate you starting out with this isn't the final vote in the House. The Senate has their work to do. We'll come together on a conference committee. All that helps us improve this legislation. Look, we're going very bold, both in becoming competitive around the world and how we simplify the tax code. None of that is easy. And so I think at every step, including the Senate, and a final conference where we come together on the common ground, really critical. So look, I'm not prejudging a lot of things at this point, only that we now, because we worked with the President, with the House, Senate earlier on one tax reform approach, we're both driving that direction.
And I appreciate the fact for any legislation to make it through, there has to be compromise on both sides, and that's certainly the way it works. But it sounds like the 20% number is not in concrete the way the SALT deduction is. What about it becoming effective in 2018 versus 19? Is that in concrete?
So let me just say on the 20%, that is where both the House and Senate are focused. Certainly the President is as well. Here's why. We need to be competitive, both here at home and abroad. That rate plays a key role. We're also redesigning the whole international system so our companies can compete and win anywhere in the world, including here at home. And so, and the sooner we get those rates and redesign into place, the better for our U.S. jobs. So we're focused on as much growth early on, becoming competitive.
And I want to talk about growth in just a moment, but before we get to that, let's talk about that so-called Byrd Rule that they have over on the Senate side. You don't have it on your House side. I'm sure you're happy to have that.
Thank the Lord.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But one of the things that does, it says it goes out past the 10-year part and says, are you going to have deficits out past the 10-year part? In order to be able to comply with that, are you willing to consider on the individual side or the corporate side the tax cuts stopping at some point during the 10 years?
So we will. The Senate obviously plays a lead role on the Byrd Amendment. What happens in the second decade, they'll be working through that in order to bring the bill out of their chamber. So let's look at the approach they're taking. Then we work that through on the conference side as well. From the House perspective, it's critical to take this momentum we've got today, deliver a good, strong vote here at the end of the week, make sure the Senate knows that when they pass that bill, we got a path to the President's desk.
So you are respectful of the Byrd Rule, it sounds like. You know that they have to comply with it. You have to help them get to the compliance. At the same time, there's the question about if you're going to get growth, how much certainty do you have to have in the tax code? How long does it have to go out? And how do you balance those two issues? Because on the one hand, you can save some money by making it less certain. On the other hand, it's harder for businesses, for example, to plan. Exactly
right. So there is a balance between the Byrd rules, those unusual budget rules the Senate complies with, in that permanence. I've long said that, look, you get the greatest growth for the greatest number of years with permanence. Businesses can invest, families can invest, jobs can come back to the United States from abroad. So we're going to go for the greatest amount of permanence we can get in those funny Senate rules, which we have to comply with.
Okay, so I want to talk about small business for a moment, because you had a little bit of a kerfuffle, if I can put it that way, with small business, and now they've come around and said, well, they can sort of support your proposal now. What are you doing on pass-throughs? What are the biggest differences between the House and the Senate right now, as you understand it, and how you deal with the pass-throughs and how they affect small business?
Yeah, so the good news is, there is so much common ground between the House and the Senate. On the pass-through side, we really put together a design that first gives a 40% tax cut for that first $75,000, sort of those Main Street businesses, whether you're the local doctor or the donut shop. Secondly, we allow businesses after that sort of choose the best approach, a simple form, which is a 70-30 split that provides relief, or if they're a capital-intensive company, to be able to even get more of their business income at that lower 25% rate. The Senate takes a little different approach, a deduction up front for businesses, and then they really plow their tax relief onto the individual side, where most pass-throughs, well, all pass-throughs pay their taxes. So there are different approaches. At the end of the day, I'm pretty confident we're going to have a very strong pro-growth bill for not just corporations, for our small businesses and pass-throughs.
So you've mentioned growth several times, and it's understandable you do, because the President of the United States has said this is all about growth. You've said this is all about growth. Makes sense. What kind of growth projections are you seeing if you get your version of tax reform through? What are you looking at?
So it varies. Tax Foundation estimates 3.5% growth. Larry Lindsay sees GDP going to 3 to 3.5 for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then settling in. Here's what we all know. We will not be stuck with the 1.8% growth model that most economists see over the next decade. So we are going in on growth on the business and the family side, because, look, the American people, we have to have stronger growth than what we have today.
How confident are you in any of those projections, sir? I mean, because that really is the underpinnings of the entire tax reform package. How confident are you in those growth projections?
Well, here's the good news. We know this is proven. We've seen it in the Reagan reforms. We saw it in the John F. Kennedy tax cuts as well. We saw local economies really take off. More importantly, we know our businesses competing worldwide. Man, other countries are just blowing by us. Making them competitive in a big way is a big growth factor. And then the expensing, full and unlimited, riding off of that. Capital investment in buildings or in plants, equipment, software technology, big growth driver as well. So I'm very confident about the growth we're going to get.
So if you are confident in the growth projections, sir, would you be willing to consider legislation that would say, if we don't get that kind of growth, then we'll revisit these tax cuts because we didn't get what we thought we'd have?
Look, I'm confident we're going to get that growth. And by the way, if for some reason it doesn't happen, I know it will. Look, I'd go deeper into making this more pro-growth, but I'll tell you right now, that 20% rate is the lowest in U.S. history. The pass-through rate, the lowest in modern history. The redesigning of our international code leapfrogs us back into that lead pack. And so, look, I think there's going to be very strong economic growth. We're really going to break out of this doldrums of the last decade.
Okay, and finally, sir, some people talk about politics as if it's something they don't want to deal with, but the fact is that's the way we come together in a democracy and decide things. So let's talk about the politics of this as a practical matter. There's an election coming up next November. You'll be up for election. All the other members of the House will be up for re-election. Give me the sense of the political consequences here if you do not get tax reform through. What do you anticipate?
So I will tell you this, the Republicans that I work with on this, the president as well, this isn't about us. This really is about the American people. They haven't seen paychecks increased in a decade. Our business investment's been stalled out in some ways for years. So we've got to get the economy going to give people some hope around here. That's what drives us. Politically, that'll take care of itself. We deliver on a pro-growth tax reform package. The politics will handle itself.